A small cobblestone-lined café in Prague. A quiet autumn afternoon. Lena Novak, 28, the manager of the bookstore next door, stops by for her daily espresso. In the corner booth sits Mark Bennett, 38, a single dad, always focused on his laptop. Beside him, his 7-year-old daughter, Emily, reads intently. Lena has watched them for months. Mark is polite, silent, and always leaves exactly at 5 p.m. Today, Lena decides to sit down. She asks, half joking, half serious, "Why don't you have a girlfriend?" Mark freezes for a few seconds. Because the truth is something he just couldn't say out loud. Mark Bennett was a phantom drifting through the gold-hued heart of Prague. To the tourists snapping photos of the Charles Bridge, he was just another face. To the locals in the old town, he was the quiet American, the man with the kind eyes and the heavy silence. But to himself, Mark was a man living in an elaborate loop of echoes. He worked as a freelance software designer, a job that allowed him to hide behind a fortress of binary code and cold logic. It was a world where inputs always led to predictable outputs, far from the messy, chaotic, and often heartbreaking nature of human emotion. He felt safer among algorithms than among people who might ask questions he wasn't ready to answer. His life was stripped of any unnecessary noise. His minimalist apartment, overlooking a narrow alleyway, contained only the essentials for him and the one person who gave his world meaning. Emily. At 7 years old, Emily was an old soul wrapped in a small frame. She had inherited her mother's wide amber eyes, the kind of eyes that seemed to look right through Mark's carefully constructed armor. Every time she laughed, it felt like a needle to Mark's heart. It was a beautiful sound, but it was always followed by the deafening silence of the woman who should have been there to hear it. Mark often found himself holding his breath when Emily looked up, terrified that she would see the cracks in his composure. Mark's wife, Sarah, had been gone for 5 long years. She was taken in a sudden, senseless accident on a rainy night that had permanently rewritten his reality. Since that moment, Mark hadn't just lost a wife, he had lost his map to the future. He built a fortress around his heart, not out of malice, but out of a desperate need for preservation. He didn't avoid people because he was cold. He avoided them because he was already full. His heart was a museum dedicated to a single person, and there was simply no room for a new exhibit. He feared that letting anyone else in would mean evicting the memory of Sarah, and that was a cost he wasn't willing to pay. Every day after school, the ritual was the same. They walked down the winding alleys to the Velvet Bean, a cafe that smelled of roasted cinnamon, old wood, and history. Emily would sit with a book, usually a dense fantasy novel far beyond her grade level, and Mark would open his laptop. To the outside world, he was the icon of the perfect single dad. He was the man who never checked his phone when his daughter was speaking. He was the man who tied her laces with a tenderness that made strangers stop and stare. But he was also completely untouchable, wrapped in a shroud of invisible glass that no one dared to break. Lena Novak, the manager of the Inkwell bookstore next door, had made a study of him. She had been observing Mark for nearly a year, watching him through the large glass windows of the cafe. She noticed the details others missed. She saw the way he checked his watch every 20 minutes, as if he were waiting for a signal that would never come. She noticed his strange second cup ritual. Every afternoon, Mark would order 2 coffees. He would drink 1 black and place the second cup, always with a splash of cream and a hint of hazelnut, on the opposite side of the table. He would let it sit there for exactly 10 minutes, the steam slowly vanishing into the stagnant air, before asking the waiter to take it away. He never touched it. He just looked at it with a longing that bordered on prayer. But the most haunting detail was the necklace. Mark didn't wear a wedding band on his finger. Instead, a plain silver ring hung from a sturdy leather cord tucked beneath his shirt. Lena had seen him reach for it in moments of stress, pressing the cold metal against his skin as if it were a battery that could recharge his soul. It was his anchor in a world that felt too fast and too bright. Lena found herself increasingly drawn to his gravity. It wasn't just that he was handsome in a rugged, tired sort of way. It was the weight he carried. It was a silence that spoke of 1,000 unread chapters. She started small, leaving bookmarks in the novels Emily bought, or recommending children's classics that Mark would quietly purchase without a word. Mark was always impeccably polite, his smiles thin and fleeting, like a ghost passing through a room. He was a man who lived a life designed to avoid new people, new feelings, new pain. To Mark, the idea of a girlfriend wasn't just a social concept. It was a betrayal of the highest order. It was an admission that Sarah was a closed chapter. It was a terrifying leap into a world where he might forget the specific pitch of Sarah's voice or the way she smelled like rain and jasmine. He was content to be the father with the ring on a string, the man who lived in a world where the only woman he ever loved was a memory that refused to dim. He had convinced himself that loyalty meant staying in the dark. As the autumn leaves turned from gold to a deep, bruised crimson, the distance between the corner booth and the rest of the world began to diminish. It happened through Emily. The little girl had developed a fierce admiration for Lena. She saw the bookstore manager as a high priestess of stories. Emily would often wander over to Lena's table, dragging her heavy books and asking for the secret meaning of a particular passage. Soon, Mark was forced to look up from his screen. He was caught in the gravitational pull of their growing friendship, a pull that made his heart rate spike in a way he hadn't felt in years. Lena was a master of the slow approach. She knew that if she pushed too hard, Mark would vanish like mist over the Vltava. She didn't ask about his past. She didn't pry into why he moved to Prague. She simply offered presence. She talked about the local history of the cobblestone streets and the books that changed her life. Slowly, the polite retreat became a quiet engagement. Mark found himself looking toward the door of the bookstore at 3:10 p.m. every day, wondering if the light would hit Lena's hair the same way it did yesterday. Lena was like a cool, fresh breeze in a room that had been sealed shut for far too long. She brought color back into his periphery, but the barrier was still there, a thick, transparent wall of glass. Whenever the conversation drifted toward anything personal, anything involving we or tomorrow, Mark would execute a perfect tactical withdrawal. He would ask Lena about her inventory or shift the focus back to Emily's schoolwork. He was a man who lived in the now because the before was too painful and the after was too scary. He was terrified that if he moved forward, he would lose the person he was leaving behind. One rainy Tuesday, the city was draped in a gray, melancholic mist. The café was nearly empty. The only sound the hiss of the espresso machine and the rhythmic drumming of rain against the glass. Emily was deep into a book about the constellations, tracing the stars with her small fingers. Mark was staring at a blank document on his screen, his knuckles white as he gripped the table. Lena sat down across from him, uninvited for the first time. "You're 1,000 miles away, Mark," she said softly, her voice barely rising above the rain. Mark looked up, a flash of genuine panic crossing his face. "Is it that obvious? You've been on page one of your thoughts for the last hour." Lena looked at him, seeing the exhaustion and the way his hand gripped the ring beneath his shirt. She decided to break the Prague silence that had become his sanctuary. "Mark, I've wanted to ask you something for a long time. You're a good man. You're kind, brilliant, and an incredible father. But you live like a monk in a cathedral of ghosts. Why are you choosing to be so profoundly alone?" The silence that followed was suffocating. The air in the cafe felt like it had been sucked out of the room. Mark didn't blink. He didn't offer a polite deflection. He just stared at the scarred wood of the table, tracing a scratch with his thumb. He felt a wave of nausea. He couldn't tell her that he still talked to Sarah in the shower, or that his girlfriend was a woman who lived in the scent of old sweaters and jazz records they used to play on Sundays. He was still waiting for a phantom to come home. He finally looked up, his voice tight and devoid of its usual warmth. "I'm not alone, Lena. I have Emily. She is my world. That has to be enough. I've already had the love of my life. I don't see the point in looking for a shadow of it. Some people only get one sunset, Lena. I'm just trying to remember the colors of mine." Lena shook her head slowly, her eyes reflecting a pity that stung worse than anger. "It's enough to survive, Mark. But is it enough to live? Or are you just hiding in a place where no one can hurt you again? Because there's a difference between being loyal to a memory and being a prisoner of it. Sarah wouldn't want you to be a prisoner. Mark didn't answer. He couldn't. His throat felt like it was closing. He simply packed his laptop with trembling hands and stood up. We have to go, Emily. It's 5 o'clock. Pack your things. As they reached the heavy wooden door, the cold wind blowing in from the street, Emily paused. She looked back at Lena, her amber eyes shimmering with a profound, almost adult sadness. She leaned in and whispered something that caused the world to stop spinning for Lena. Daddy still talks to Mom every night, Emily whispered. He writes her long letters on the blue stationery she liked. He says her heart is still in the room, watching over us. He's not looking for a girlfriend because he doesn't think Mom ever left. Lena watched them disappear into the mist, head down, clutching the ring through his coat as if it were a life preserver. Lena watched them disappear into the mist, realizing that Mark wasn't just a grieving widower. He was a keeper of a sacred, agonizing flame. He wasn't single. He was a husband whose wife was simply invisible to everyone but him. The revelation from Emily was a tectonic shift for Lena. She realized she hadn't been competing with a memory. She had been competing with a living presence. She spent the next several days in a daze, unable to focus on her books. She thought about those letters. She imagined Mark sitting in a dark room by a single lamp, pouring his soul onto blue paper, reaching out into the void for a hand he could no longer hold. It wasn't just grief. It was a self-imposed prison of loyalty. He was trying to keep her alive by refusing to live himself. A week later, Mark returned to the café. He looked broken. The shadows under his eyes were like bruises. He sat in his corner booth, but he didn't even open his laptop. He just stared at the empty chair across from him, where the second cup of hazelnut coffee sat, steaming. Lena approached him, but this time, her energy was different. The flirtatious edge was gone, replaced by a deep, quiet reverence. "Mark," she said, her voice a whisper. "Emily told me about the letters, about why you're still waiting for an answer." Mark flinched as if she had struck him. He looked at Emily, who was occupied with a puzzle, and then he looked at the floor. He let out a long, ragged breath, the sound of a man who was tired of holding up a crumbling ceiling. "I write them because if I stop, she dies again," he admitted, his voice cracking with the weight of 5 years of silence. "I'm afraid that if I let a new voice into my head, I'll stop hearing hers. I'm afraid that if I find happiness, I'm telling the universe that Sarah was replaceable. I'm staying in the dark because I don't want to admit that her light is gone. Every word I write is a promise that I haven't forgotten." Lena listened as the first twist unfolded in his words. Mark wasn't just mourning, he was performing a penance. He believed that Emily needed to see that their family was still whole to feel secure. He believed that by staying miserable, he was protecting Emily's memory of what a family should be. He was sacrificing his own chance at a future to build a monument to a past that he thought was his daughter's only anchor. "I want her to grow up knowing that love is forever," Mark said, his eyes finally welling with tears. "Even if it's a love that only exists on paper. I don't want her to think we just move on." But then the second twist arrived, the one that would shatter the monument and free the man. That evening, as Mark was performing his nightly ritual of tucking Emily into bed, the room was bathed in the soft glow of a nightlight. Emily reached out and touched the leather cord around his neck. "Daddy?" she asked, her voice small but clear. "Do you think Mom is lonely?" "No, baby. I think she's watching over us. She's never lonely as long as we remember her." "I don't think she's lonely either," Emily said. "But I think she's tired of being the only one you talk to. I think she wants you to have someone to hold your hand when I'm at school. I talked to her in my dream last night, Daddy. She was wearing her yellow dress." Mark's heart skipped a beat. "What did she say, Emily?" "She said that love isn't a candle, Daddy. You don't lose the flame just because you use it to light another one. She said she wants our house to have more light, not more shadows. She told me that she's already in the future, waiting for us to catch up. And she said she wouldn't be sad if you loved Lena. She said she'd be happy because then she wouldn't have to worry about you being sad when I'm not in the room." She wants you to stop writing to her and start talking to the world. The words hit Mark like a tidal wave, washing away 5 years of self-imposed guilt. He had been building a cage and calling it a tribute. He had assumed that Sarah's love required his suffering as proof of its value. He had been so focused on being a widower that he forgot how to be a person. And in one simple, devastatingly beautiful sentence, his 7-year-old daughter had revealed that the woman he loved would never want him to live in a museum. She wanted him to live in a home. Mark didn't cry then. He simply sat in the silence of the room, feeling the weight of the silver ring against his chest. He realized that Sarah didn't want to be the reason he was alone. She wanted to be the reason he knew how to love in the first place. She was the foundation, not the ceiling. He went to his desk that night and looked at the mountain of blue envelopes. He didn't open them. He didn't need to. He picked up a fresh sheet of paper and wrote 3 words. I am ready. He didn't address it to Sarah. He addressed it to himself. The next afternoon, the sun was fighting its way through the heavy clouds over Prague. Lena was dusting the shelves in the bookstore when the bell above the door chimed. She turned to see Mark. He looked different. His posture was straighter, his eyes clearer. The leather cord was gone from his neck. Lena, he said, standing among the stacks of stories, I think it's time I stopped writing letters and started having conversations. With someone who can talk back, I think I've been holding on to the wrong things. Lena didn't say a word. She just walked across the room and took his hand. Mark realized then that he didn't have to leave Sarah behind to move forward. He was bringing the best parts of her with him into a brand new story. He had finally learned that healing wasn't about the absence of pain. It was about the presence of hope. To invite Lena into the private spaces of his life. Not just the corner booth of a cafe, but the quiet walks through Petrin Hill and the weekend trips to the puppet theaters Emily loved. He stopped hiding his smiles. He stopped looking at his watch every 20 minutes. He started talking about Sarah. Not as a ghost or a tragic ending, but as a person who had once been his best friend. He told Lena about the way Sarah used to burn toast every single morning, and how she could never remember where she left her keys, even though they were usually in her hand. He shared her favorite poems and the way she used to hum while she painted. Lena was the perfect listener. She didn't try to compete with a legend. She didn't try to fix his past. She simply stood beside him, creating a safe harbor for his memories to land. Lena showed him that her presence wasn't a replacement for Sarah. It was an expansion of his capacity to care. She didn't want his old love to go away. She wanted to build a new love alongside it. She brought laughter back into their apartment, the kind of loud, messy laughter that comes from being truly seen. She helped him repaint the kitchen, replacing the faded wallpaper with a bright, sunny yellow that Emily picked out. Emily was the catalyst for it all. She bloomed under the dual attention. To her, Lena wasn't a new mom. She was Lena, a friend, a mentor, and a person who made her dad's eyes sparkle again. The 3 of them became a familiar sight in the neighborhood. They would sit in the park, Emily running through the fallen leaves, while Mark and Lena sat on a bench, their hands finally entwined in the open air. For the first time in 5 years, the second cup on the table was for someone who could actually drink it and smile back. One evening, as they were walking across the Vltava River, the city lights reflecting off the water like scattered diamonds, Mark stopped. He looked at Lena, the cool night air ruffling his hair. I spent so long thinking that happiness was a betrayal, he said softly. I thought that if I let myself feel this peace with you, it meant Sarah didn't matter. I thought I was erasing her, one smile at a time. Lena took his face in her hands, her eyes reflecting the warmth of the city. Mark, Sarah gave you the heart that knows how to love me. You're not erasing her. You're honoring her. Every time you're kind to me, every time you laugh with Emily, that's the love she gave you, continuing to grow. You're not a widower anymore, Mark. You're just a man who found his way back to the light. And she's the one who gave you the lamp. Mark smiled, a real deep smile that reached all the way to his soul. I think I finally believe you. I think she'd be happy we're standing here. If you believe healing takes courage, type, I will live kindly. The defining moment of his transformation happened that night. Mark returned home and went to his closet. He pulled out a small wooden chest, his memory box. Inside were Sarah's things, her favorite scarf, her wedding photos, and the mountain of blue letters. Mark took the silver ring from his pocket, the one he had worn against his skin for 1,800 days. He didn't feel a pang of guilt as he placed it in the box. He felt a sense of completion. He wasn't putting her away, he was giving her a place of honor where she could rest. He was closing the chapter of the grieving ghost and starting the chapter of the man who found hope. He realized that the ring didn't need to be around his neck to be in his heart. It was time to stop holding on to the cold metal and start holding on to a warm hand. The weight was gone. The echoes had turned into a harmony. Mark Bennett was finally truly home. 1 year later, the golden hour in Prague is a sight to behold. The sun dips behind the spires of the St. Vitus Cathedral, casting a warm, honey-like glow over the city. The Inkwell bookstore is closing for the day, but the light is still on in the back. In the cozy reading nook surrounded by the scent of old paper and fresh tea, Mark and Emily are sitting together, but they aren't alone. Lena is there too, her head resting on Mark's shoulder as they look at a photo album. It's a different kind of album. It has photos of Sarah on the first few pages, followed by photos of their new life together. Mark and Lena have been building a foundation of mutual respect and quiet joy. They haven't made grand, sweeping promises. They prefer the steady, daily commitments of showing up for each other. They understand that love is a verb, something you do every day. Emily has blossomed into a joyful, confident child. She still talks to Mom in her heart, but now she tells her about the books Lena recommended and the way Mark looks when he's happy. She has learned the most important lesson a child can learn, that love isn't a finite resource. It's a river that can flow in many directions at once without ever running dry. She knows that having Lena doesn't mean she has less of her mother. It just means she has more love in her world. Mark has found a peace he never thought possible. He still has days where the grief hits him. A certain song or the smell of jasmine will catch him off guard. But now he has someone to hold his hand until the waves subside. He no longer writes letters to the dead. He writes journals for the living. He has become a code whisperer of his own heart, listening to the subtle signals of joy he used to ignore in his mourning. The story of the single dad in the corner booth has become a legend in their corner of Prague. It's a story whispered by the baristas and the neighbors. It's a reminder that we are not defined by the tragedies that break us, but by the courage we find to put the pieces back together into something new and beautiful. The final scene shows the three of them walking out of the bookstore together. Mark has one arm wrapped tightly around Emily's shoulders, and his other hand is firmly gripped in Lena's. They look like a family, not a perfect one, but a real one. A family built on the wreckage of the past and the fierce, unyielding hope of the future. The voiceover concludes as the camera pans up to the starlit sky over the Vltava. She asked why he had no girlfriend. The answer was hidden in a love that never truly left. But Mark learned that healing isn't about leaving the past behind or forgetting the ones we lost. It's about bringing the best parts of the past into a brighter tomorrow. Healing begins when we stop building monuments to our pain and start building bridges to each other. Because love is the only thing that grows the more you give it away. And sometimes the best way to remember the dead is to truly, courageously live for the living. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to Chip Healing Stories. We tell the ones that shouldn't be forgotten.